So Jesus has his conversion experience at the Jordan River, and the first thing that we find in chapter 4 is the Spirit is sending him into the wilderness. What's up with that?
To be tempted by the devil, right? So I told you that I love you. Now you're in real trouble.
Isn't that just like God? We have this high experience. We think that, okay, now my life is set. Now things are going to go wonderfully and beautifully. And then, but the first thing that the Spirit does oftentimes is send us right into the wilderness.
Yes. And there's no help for it, really. If Jesus now knows his identity is so much bigger than he ever really had realized before, then he does have a problem, which is, now what do I do? And so I don't think that God is sending him in the wilderness just to be spunky or difficult. There is an issue that is absolutely essential, and he's not just going to get tempted, he's also going with the Spirit's guidance and help, so double, right? I also have a little aside, if you travel to Israel, some of the guides will tell you that Jesus is baptized in the Jordan down near the Dead Sea, and then he walks over to the edge of where the rift goes up and hangs out for 40 days, which I think is ludicrous. I mean, what's the whole tradition? Wilderness means Mount Sinai. I mean, like Elijah and Moses and his whole tradition, at such an important point, he's going to head to the holy mountain. So that's where I believe he went, and that's why it's taking 40 days, among other reasons. And 40, I don't think you count like 1, 2, 3. 40 probably means a sufficient amount of time to do such a huge thing.
Is there a parallel with Jesus and Moses going on in Luke?
It's an unhappy one for Moses. I mean, they're wandering around for 40 years because they blew it. And God's waiting for their children to grow up and carry on, because he figures their slave mentality, they're never going to make it. But there are connections, of course. I mean, they're trying to get ready to go into the promised land, and Jesus is trying to lead some people into a much huger, more lasting promised land. You can play with those parallels forever, yeah. But chapter 4 is huge to me because it's where Jesus concludes what he will not do with his ministry, how he will not design it, how he will not try to build it. And then he tells us how he will build it, what he'll build it on, and those principles are huge. And most of the church, from my perspective, has never taken that to heart. They blow every time. I mean, Jesus is getting temptations, and we're still suckering into them like we never heard the story. And that just blows my mind.
So what is he tempted by then? What are we in the church ignoring?
Well, in places, ignoring, yeah. Well, the 3 temptations, I believe, are, of course, the biggest temptations you can walk into to blow your Christian life. And the first temptation is to feed hungry people. What could possibly be wrong with that? We always think Satan, wears a red suit, has horns and a long tail, and only tempts you with evil. Well, he wouldn't get anywhere if he was that stupid. He tempts you with good, but it's twisted, just enough to get you off track and ruin everything. And so the drama is fascinating, because now Satan's running into somebody who's wise enough not to fall for all his tricks. But the first temptation is, turn the stones into bread, means, well, base your ministry on feeding the hungry. People will love you, of course. And the church suckers into that big time and thinks that's the whole move. They never get to the part about man does not live by bread alone. So Jesus says eventually, I'm sorry, I can't go this way. This is not big enough. If I only feed hungry people, it will all fall apart.
So what you're saying is, Jesus does feed hungry people during his ministry, but the temptation is that he based his ministry in feeding the hungry.
Well, that's the genius. Most of us, if we even see through the temptation, then we overreact and go the other way. And Jesus is not that impacted by Satan. So yeah, he'll feed hungry people from time to time, but never base his ministry on it. I mean, at one point they're going to crown him king because they think they're going to get more feeding of the 5,000 scenarios, and he just walks away.
So what are the other temptations? One is feeding the hungry.
Well, I gave you the key to one, and we'll give the groups the key. Don't you think they should have to figure out the other two?
What you're suggesting is that each one is a temptation to base his ministry on something.
On a false premise, yeah.
So
basically on doing the good works of feeding and helping love your neighbors, how we would put it. And secondly, on military might. And thirdly, on spiritual miracles. And he rejects all of them and says, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. And so Satan's quoting Scripture, he's quoting Scripture back.
Interesting, you almost have the prophet, priest, and king approach in there too. Be a prophet like Moses, who also fed the people in the wilderness miraculously, and then you have the priestly role with the temple and the miracles, and you have the kingly role with the political power. So
now we should also mention, Jesus can go and do this in 10 minutes, and I think it's easy to miss that. This is not a simple deal. And so the top ace of all time takes 40 days and 40 nights to figure it out. We think 15 minutes ought to be enough for us. Which to me tells us something about the different dimension of prayer for Jesus and for most of his followers.
So what I hear you suggesting in all this is that we tend to think of temptation as being tempted to do something really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But really, you're saying, as it applies to Jesus and perhaps to the rest of us, we're not really tempted by doing something bad and nasty and evil so much as tempted to do something good and wonderful.
Bingo. Always. A few of us do, of course, succumb to bad temptations. Most of us are ruining our Christian life by succumbing to good temptations.
So isn't it just good just to do good thing? Why? If it's a good thing to feed the poor or to exercise political might or what have you, if you're using it for good purposes, why can't we just say, well, I'm doing good, and so what's wrong with that?
But that is what we say. Yeah. We're good, we're doing good, therefore we have now transformed the world, right? We're smart enough to outwit Satan all on our own, by our own logic and by our own power. And so we try it generation after generation and it never works and we don't catch on. So we keep staying in control and doing, if I am a follower of Jesus, can I help anybody I want anytime I want? Don't I have to get permission? Am I not somebody's servant?
So maybe that classic line, what would Jesus do, doesn't even cut it then, because just because Jesus did it, and we just say, well, Jesus did it, that's good, therefore I do it, that's not good enough either.
That's wonderful and so shrewd, that's right. Meaning, if I just say, what would Jesus do, I'm still in control. But if I say, Jesus, what do you want me to do? That's a whole different ballgame and a whole different life. And the problem with that is then you have to spend enough time in prayer to try to hear the answer to your own question from the Spirit. And that's where I think most of the church, most of the time, is not willing to go.
You mean we can't just get this out of a book and get the recipe?
How is it working for us?
There's a lot going on in chapter 4. Quite a lot going on. He emerges from the wilderness, and next thing we know, he's in his hometown.
Yeah, with Satan still shaking his head saying, who is that?
That's right. But he begins his ministry and shows up at one point in Nazareth, which is his hometown, and all hell breaks loose.
Well, not at first.
Right.
At first, everybody is absolutely pleased because he's such a wonderful young man, and I knew him when. But he does quote Isaiah and say, having decided and worked with Satan in the wilderness, what he won't build his ministry on, he now states what he will build his ministry on. So he's preaching good news to the poor, etc. Again, I think, for the most part, the followers miss it. I sure have, for years and years. And so we reinterpret that. It's funny how subtly we will do that. But we reinterpret what he says he'll base his ministry on, and we say, okay, what we're supposed to be doing is talking all the rich into being generous, talking all the powerful into helping the downtrodden. And Jesus skips that completely. He's not talking to anybody like that. He's saying, if anybody is poor, you can have the gospel right now. You don't have to be in prison. You don't have to live this way. He's back to the baptism. If you die to this world, they can't control you anymore. Not ever. So I'm announcing to you that you're free. And that is, that's mind-blowing. And our first reaction always is, that won't work, I don't understand that. Bingo.
So, and certainly a lot of them would have been waiting for the kingdom to arrive or for the next stage when, waiting for the Romans to kick off.
Or somebody come along and beat them off.
Right. And Jesus is saying, you don't have to wait for that.
That's not my way. Yes, I'm not fighting the Romans. I'm telling you, you cannot be controlled if you won't be. You can join a new kingdom, follow a new king right now.
So what implications does that have for now?
Endless. But we would have to try it to find out.
You have a suggestion for being chapter 4, as given that chapter 4 is so heavy with material. You have some suggestions for groups trying to work.
I know that the schedule is one night per chapter, and 4, you're going to miss so much in one night that I was just saying, I would hope most groups would say, hey, we're going to break the rule here and spend at least 2 nights. You still have to spend a lot more homework than that to get into it, because we're still only scratching the surface. Why did they turn angry at Jesus? I mean, we can argue for years, but I think that they were patronizing him, patting him on the head, and made him furious. And he started the fight. And then they want to kill him, and find out that's not as easy as they thought. Not if he didn't want to be killed. So that's fascinating. I hope they'll spend at least 2 nights and maybe double up later on. Like there's not near as much in chapter 17 and 18 combined as there is in chapter 4.
So double up, or have an extra long meeting, or
or meet twice,
or have the church offer an extra opportunity, or use it in worship. There'll be many different ways, but we want to acknowledge that there's a lot of material going on in chapter 4.
It's imperative to work your way through the temptations, because you're getting them too, every one of them, and you don't think you're getting the third one. I mean, most of the people I've run into say, I was never tempted the third way, I don't have enough power. Oh yes, you are.
Excellent.